Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking through my Minerva standard deck profile, a comprehensive guide for Minerva in standard. So this will go through the deck build as well as some tech card alternative, maybe cheaper options that you can consider for the deck, mulligan choices, stuff that you will go through during your ride line, soul charging, as well as some order of skills, lines of play, and matchup knowledge. If you guys need any coaching for BRO or Springfest, feel free to hit me up on Metafy. My link is in the description. Feel free to book a session and then we can get started. Okay, so starting off for the deck, for standard, obviously we have the ride line consisting of all of the Genesis cards. So the ride line, pretty self-explanatory. You need to run this ride line because the grade 1 and the grade 2 allows you to search your deck for specific cards, like clones of each other, so that you can get your deck rolling. The good thing about this ride line is that it compresses the deck. So what that means is you're able to filter out normal units from your deck without impacting any of the trigger counts in your deck. So the filter on the grade 1 and the grade 2, each time you ride up from 2 to 3, you check top 5 for any 2 cards, for up to 2 cards, and then soul charge them. So this ride line is a must. So that's the ride line there. Going forward, so going through my grade 3s, so I run 3 Minerva and 1 Chalice. So Persona Ride is very crucial in this deck, which is why we're playing the Chalice as the 4th copy of Persona Ride. Persona Ride allows you to essentially hit big on the center column because Minerva is a restander. So the more copies of Persona Ride, the better, but it also allows you to pump up your rear guard attacks as well. So for example, Chamomile allows you to call out a copy of her when she's soul blasted. So any new copy will inherently get the Persona Ride as well as the 5k that you get off Minerva. So which is why I think Persona Ride is just so crucial for the deck. Pretty much if you lose one turn of Persona Ride, your tempo goes out of whack and you essentially lose just because of the loss of tempo. So you want to chain Persona Rides, hence why we're playing the Chalice as well as the 3 Minervas. As well, we do play 4 Angelica. This card is pretty insane, allows you to get away from being damage denied. There are times where your opponent will starve you of Counterblast because they don't want you using Chamomile as well as Minerva, so you have to kind of pick and choose. But by having this, you're able to free yourself from that. So if your opponent gives you 1, then this essentially counts as 1 copy of Chamomile being used, which is really, really strong. As well, it's another grade 3 with Regalia in its name, which fulfills the plus 5k on Minerva, so it's definitely a must in this deck. So that's that. Going to grade 2s. So 3 Chamomile, and then 4 Calibre and 4 Drilling Angel. So Chamomile is a must. It's essentially your multi-attacker in this deck. So each time she's soul blasted, you can counterblast 1 to call her out. So it combos well with Angelica because Angelica's cost is soul blast 1. So you can soul blast this out, fulfill her skill, shove her into soul to countercharge, and then the counterblast that you countercharge can be used for Chamomile. So as you can see the importance of the Persona Ride with the 5k inherently from Minerva skill, it just allows for the multi-attack of this deck to work way, way better. So yeah, 3 Chamomile because we can't really run another one outside of the ride line. And then we play Calibre and Drilling Angel. So we'll talk about Calibre first because Calibre allows you to have a early game. So usually what you want to do is you take 1 damage and have this in your hand. So you Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, top 3, call 1. And usually like earlier on you can search for your Chamomiles or Drilling Angel. Preferably not Chamomile because then you kind of want it in your deck so that you top 5 search for it. But also like you can just call it out, ditch it, and then this is why Drilling Angel is good. So I'll explain that in a sec. But the fact that you can get 3 lines just off this, off being this 1 card, so you ride the grade 2, call Calibre out, and then call another card on the other column, just makes this deck, I guess, aggro early without having to wait on any of your later game stuff like your Chamomiles, because she needs a Minerva Vanguard, which you don't have prior to grade 3. So yeah, for Calibre, and then for Drilling Angel. So this is why you can call Chamomile out, because what you can do is when you call Chamomile out, you attack with it, right? Intercept off with it, and then Drilling Angel it back into Soul, which fulfills your multi-attack later on, because then you can Soul Blast her for like Minerva's effect or Angelica's effect, Count Blast 1, call it out, so it becomes like your 4th or 5th attack. So yeah, that's a little niche play that you can do. So don't feel bad whenever you search Chamomile off Calibre, it's not that bad. So yeah, that's 4 Drilling Angels. And in a deck, you obviously run 4 PGs, 1 Sentinel, Elementaria, because it bypasses Guard Restrict. So that's 4 PGs. And then the rest are Genesis related grade 1s. So Melissa is pretty much a clone of Chamomile, except it can only be called in the back row. So usually what you can do is you Soul Blast this off Minerva so that you have a booster before the battle phase attacks. But as well, she can Soul Charge the unit or the card that you see on top of Minerva. So Minerva scries 1, and then if you don't like the card, you can just Soul Charge it off Melissa, making this deck have no soul problems at all. So yeah, that's Melissa. And then for Cider, I think this card is really strong. So what this card says is essentially use this as a free booster as long as you have Minerva on the field and it becomes a 10k shield. So whenever you have this in your hand, chuck it down onto your Riga as a booster, because after battle when it boosts, as long as you have a Minerva, you can bounce it back to hand. So yeah, free 8k boost without compromising any cards on the field. The fact that it bounces itself allows you to get past all like the tricky control matchups like Gravidia, Prison. Yeah, just it essentially frees up your board so that you don't minus from control decks. So yeah, that is Cider. I think this card is really good. And then remaining the triggers. So I run 8 crits, 3 draws, 1 OT, and then 4 heals. So 4 heals, pretty self-explanatory. And then 8 crit. So the effect crit can actually be changed to the vanilla crit, because you never ever need to use the Intersoul crit, well, the Intersoul ability, but in the cases that you do, then it's good to have it. But I've never found the need for it. You just use the 5k body, sometimes you commit it, and then you feel pretty good just having a 5k booster. So yeah, 4 heal, 8 crit, and then 3 draws, OT, because OT is OP. You hit OT, sometimes you just win games. And yeah, that's pretty much the deck in terms of tech cards. So there are a few tech cards that you can use, especially if you are on a budget. So for example, you can't afford the Calibres. I think that's like the only card that can be interchanged. Drilling Angel seems pretty cheap at the moment, but if it ever is expensive, then you can look into Cadwalla. So Cadwalla is a grade 2 from the Youthberg trial deck. The best thing about that is that not only do you get Cadwalla, but you also get the Elementaria Sanctitude. Essentially, Cadwalla serves the same purpose as Angelica, where after battle you can Soul Blast and retire it, look at the top 3, reveal 1 card and add it to hand, and if you didn't reveal 1, you draw 1. The purpose of that is to trigger your Chamomile. The difference between Calibre and Cadwalla is 1 is on place versus 1 is on attack. So the value on board presence is better with Calibre, whereas the chain attacking is better with Cadwalla by proccing your Chamomiles. The good thing about Cadwalla is that it refunds itself, so it's a tradable card on the rearguard. So after you attack with it, you can Soul Blast, get one of the cards in the top 3, or you draw 1. So the card that you just committed onto the field replaces itself. But as well, you can freely call Chamomile into the space of where Cadwalla is, which means that you get an extra 5k shield for the next turn without losing a card. Whereas Angelica Soul Blasts 1, shoves herself into Soul, but you don't get a card back. So essentially you're trading a 1-for-1, so it's a net 0 between Angelica and Chamomile, whereas Cadwalla is essentially a +1, because Cadwalla refunds itself and then Chamomile +1 by calling it out. So that is the first tech card or alternative that you can look at. If you have more Cadwallas, then it's good, but I wouldn't include Cadwalla in by taking Calibrate out, only if it's a cheaper option that you're looking for, because I know Calibrate at the moment is really expensive. I would definitely include 2 copies, but no more than that, because I feel that the importance of Calibrate in the early game is really good, because it provides a board which allows me to 3-line my opponent. Another alternative is the grade 2 and the grade 1 Maple. So you can discard the grade 2 and the grade 1, and then each time you ride over your Minerva, or when you ride on a Minerva, then you can recall it back from the drop zone. The best thing about the grade 2 and the grade 1 Maple is that the numbers ends up hitting for, I think, 13 or 15 or 23, 25. The numbers hit the same as a chamomile, and it's free, right? So same kind of deal with Cadwalla, where you bring it back, which is a +1, but then you get rid of it because you're gonna Soul Blast over it and then call the chamomile, so it's a net 0. Well, not really, right? Because it's still a free 5k shield, so chamomile actually becomes +1. The advantage by calling Maples out and then refunding the cost by calling a chamomile out, which means that you get a free 5k shield every turn. The best thing about the grade 1 as well, because it's grade 1, it can intercept. So what you want to do is you place the chamomile over the grade 1, and then you essentially have 2 intercepts for the next turn. If you're on a budget and you can't seem to find the Elementaria, then you can substitute the Perfect Guard for, well, the grade 1 Perfect Guard for the Elementaria. That's not too much of a big deal. Like, the only deck that you're really worrying about in terms of guard restrict is Laronarol and Flagberg, but Laronarol isn't that impactful as of yet until the Festival Collection card, or the booster. So the Elementaria, nice to have, you know, good against like triple drive decks, like the grade 4 decks, anything that gets triple drive, so it's like a free PG. Free PG is always good, so yeah, always good to have. And then the Chalice. So Chalice can be replaced for any of the cards I mentioned before. If I know Chalice is like 25 a piece, 30 a piece at the moment. It's nice being another Persona Ride, you know, card, but if you're on a budget, then you can, I guess, swap it for like any of the grade 2, grade 1 Maples, the Cadwalla. I think those are, you know, good targets to replace the Chalice. And then the last one is talking about fronts versus draws and crits. So draws are good because sometimes I want to see my Genesis pieces, because if I don't get a Genesis piece, then I can't use Minerva to restand. Draws are good in that factor, but sometimes like fronts, because you're attacking with your Vanguard and you always have 2 front standing units because you're calling chamomile, then the front is actually pretty impactful. But I feel that this deck doesn't generate enough advantage for you to freely play fronts. Like, the draws are nice, draws can net you into anything else on this list, and I just feel that the fronts, as impactful as it is for offense, it doesn't really help with the defense of this deck. Like, barring that, you know, you're generating so much advantage already, the fronts may be worth it, but I just feel that, you know, fronts are way less impactful than draws in this particular build, because you always need to find like a Genesis piece to discard. And then sometimes, right, during your ride line, if you're riding your grade 2 and your grade 3, and you find like 2 Melissas and 2 Chamomiles, then you're already 4 cards short out of everything else, and then you want to commit the Angelica so that you can chain attack. So you're actually only left with Cider. So Cider is like your free 8k booster, but then you have to bounce it and discard it. Sometimes you might not have Regalia pieces, but it's very rare. But in the cases that you don't, then you want the draw to try to dig for it, or at least dig for it early. And draws are always nice early game. You know, you hit a draw defensively, you can use that card to essentially guard one of the other rear guards, which is always good. So going through your mulligan choices, I think the most important card for your mulligan is Calibrate. Against most decks in the format at the moment, you need to play a bit quick or quicker. I know that Chronojet is coming out, and one of the gimmicks that Chronojet does is you pull a Swirler and you pull a GG, and then you Soul Blast 2 for the GG and you draw 1. It creates an 888 line. Calibrate does that on grade 2, which means that the tempo is still there. You want to use Calibrate as early as possible, because not only does it allows you to rush, but it allows you to thin your deck as well. Obviously, You know, if you don't have Calibre, then it feels bad. But if you're swapping this for like Cadwalla, then it's not bad to like commit this, you know, Soul Blast 1 top 3 at 1. At least then you're filtering your deck. But having Calibre early means that you can commit like another card onto like a rearguard or something and then just attack for 3 lines, so 1, 2, 3. And yeah, just that's why Calibre is just so good. But also Calibre allows you to search for these two. So your Persona Rides essentially, or even your Angelica. Like Calibre allows you to search for like grade 3s. So having like access to Angelica is also good because it's also your chain attacker. But mainly it's because of the Persona Rides. Persona Rides is really important in this deck. You always want to find it off this. If you know, hit your Minerva, you feel pretty good. And yeah, if you hit your Chalice, it's also pretty good because then you can just add it back into your hand. Essentially, you hit grade 3, you add it to hands. I think Calibre is like really good because it serves 2 purposes, but mainly it's, you know, in a format where you need to play quick, you definitely want the Calibre to call something else out onto the other rearguard and then just smack for 3 lines. And then earlier on, right, if you have like a Cider, for example, if you call like a grade 1 off the top, like a Melissa or something, Melissa on one side, and then say you have like your Chamomile Vanguard, then you can freely place the Cider onto the rearguard, right? Because this card will end up like returning to your hand anyways, because the next turn you'll be riding your Minerva. So you ride your Minerva, you attack, and then this bounces back to hand. So essentially the card that you committed here is, you know, free, yeah? Obviously, unless you're versing like a control deck, but just having that is like super duper good. Against Eva, you need to play, you know, quick because Eva has a slow start, but the longer the game goes, the more stable it becomes. So that's why you need to, you know, put on the pressure with Calibre, which is probably the most important card that you want to keep in your starting hand, but then also try to find your Persona Rides as well. You know, if you get really unlucky with Calibre and you get like 2 triggers and a grade 3, then at least, you know, you're serving the other purpose, trying to find your Persona Ride. But otherwise, if you're, you know, finding your Chamomiles or your Melissa, then you're feeling pretty good. You're gonna place it on rearguard and smack 3 lines, which is good. So when you're conducting Mulligan, you want to return all triggers, Melissa and Chamomiles. The reason why is your ride line allows you to search the top 5 for any of these copies. Sure, if you have them early, then you don't feel bad because you can commit them onto rearguard, and then Drilling Angel later on will be able to refund you whatever gets retired here. So for example, if your opponent attacks into it, then the Drilling Angel next can just put it back into Soul, so it doesn't feel too bad. Mainly you want to see this in your Soul, mainly the Chamomile. If you need to keep the Melissa, then sure, keep her because she can only call to back row, whereas Chamomile can call to front row. So you want to always see this in your top 5 checks along with your ride line, because the more copies you have of this in your Soul, the better your attack extension will be. Usually you return those 2. Drilling Angel, you don't need this in the early game too much. I would rather find yourself like Cider and Calibre, because these 2 are like your prime targets for rushing early game, because this refunds itself, because when you place it you can just bounce it back to hand, as well as Minerva and Persona Ride targets. So these are your 3 that you want in terms of order. Then you would want Calibre first, Minerva, and then Cider. Those are the 3 most important cards that you want to see. Cider is just okay. If you don't have it, then you don't have it. But these 2 definitely, Calibre and then Minerva, definitely chaining Persona Rides, super important in this deck. So just going through some of the lines of play. Usually this is the main line of play where you have an attack extender on the rearguard. So this can either be Angelica or Cadwalla if you're playing a cheaper build. But essentially what you do, you attack with this first, and then this card disappears from the slot by Soul Blasting 1, and then the card that you Soul Blast is Chamomile, and then you call over it. There is also a time where if your field or the front row is not a card that you Soul Blast. So for example, you know, you're going through your turns and you call, say, 2 Melissas or so. If you call 2 Melissas, then it doesn't feel bad because you would have Soul Blasted to create these 2 Melissas. So what you could do is you attack with Melissa first, Minerva attacks next, use her skill to Chaos 1, Ditch 1, Soul Blast 3, and then this comes out. The good thing about Minerva is that it's Soul Blast 3, so sometimes you can go 2 sides first, Minerva next, and then call 2. But the problem with this is that you lose the effect of crits, so if you ever check a crit, then the best part of it is, I guess, just assigning it to Vanguard. But sometimes you don't want to do that, like especially if your opponent's at 4 damage, you want to kind of put a crit on rearguard, and then they are still forced to guard the Vanguard because it's still a threat, because you can choose to still get a crit on this drive check, put it onto the Vanguard, and then it becomes lethal. Having options to put the critical part of the trigger on a rearguard is really crucial, which is why I feel that cards that can replace itself, like Angelica or Cadwalla, is much better in this situation. But in the cases that you do, you can attack 2 sides, you know, Soul Blast 3, and then the Chamomile calls out over on top, which is pretty much the basic stuff. But the best thing about this is that, you know, you got rid of like 2 cards that you might have kept on the field or whatever, and then, you know, you attack, and then the Cider, like I said, you know, after a boost, you can bounce it back to hand. So essentially, these 2 you got for free. If you end up Soul Blasting like 2 Melissas like over the course of 2 turns, or even like on the same turn for some odd reason, then you can call 2, promote them as just solo attackers. So if you call 2 Melissas in the front row like this, then you can attack 1, attack 2, Minerva attacks 3, and then call 2 out. So you actually committed 0 board, but the only thing is that you Soul Blasted 2 Melissas, because the Melissas would have called to the back row and you promote them in front, and then it becomes your 2 attackers. So you can see why having Persona Ride and the 5k inherently from Minerva is so important, because it converts these into 23k attackers, 10 from the Persona Ride, 5 from the Minerva, so these are 23, each are 15k shield, and then you place these on top, these are 25s each as well. So barring the triggers, then yeah, you're playing very conservatively without needing to commit anything from your hand. So, you know, you Soul Blast 2, you create a board, attack, and then Vanguard, you call 2 out, yeah. So I guess the next thing to talk about is the ordering of skills. So because Minerva has a Soul Blast 1 Scry, it depends. So if your deck is compressed, then you want to use Minerva last. But if you have something like a Drilling Angel or a Calibre, then sometimes you want to use the Scry first, dig through a card, and then play these 2. But also, Minerva, by Soul Blasting 1, you Soul Blast like one of your Melissas, right? So then you get free advantage. You check the top card and say the top card was like a Calibre, right? If you have a Calibre in the bin, then you can Drilling Angel, Calibre in, call the Calibre that you scried, which is a +1 because you checked it off this, right? And then Calibre can call something else out. You essentially created 1, 2, 3 cards just by playing 1 card, which is insane. The scrying is good if you check a normal unit that you want to call and you have a copy in the bin. But also the scry is better later on as the last effect to be used, because then you're scrying for a trigger, you keep on top, and then you can, I guess, maneuver your way depending on like what you've, I guess, checked. So for example, if you check a crit, then the likelihood of you Soul Blasting 2 Chamomiles to call 2 on like the battle phase is very unlikely, right? Because you want to call 1 so that you can stack the trigger on like one side, because you know on top is a crit. That's, I guess, the little minor optimizations that you have to do. Other ones would be damage, so you want to always counterblast all your normal units, because then Drilling Angel puts in a normal unit. You don't really want to put in a trigger unit, because why would you want to call a trigger unit from your deck? You would want to call something that is of better value, especially Ciders. If you call Cider off Drilling Angel, it's a free 10k shield into hand, because you can just call it, after boost it bounces back to hand. Just little optimizations like that, but otherwise, the deck is pretty simple. I think the deck is pretty solid. There has been some results in Japan for team tournaments, this being the 3rd deck because a lot of teams would bring Chronojet as well as Eva. So this being the 3rd deck is actually pretty interesting. So we will see this deck, I guess, evolve. At the moment, it's a pretty good deck. It's similar to Overlord, where it has the problem of the first ride not doing much. But the good thing about this deck is that it can generate 4 attacks even though you don't really use the Vanguard skill on the Grade 3 ride. So you can Angelica into like a Chamomile and then something else out. and the inherent 5k to the front row is just really good. So you can still play a good grade 2 game instead of Overlord, where Overlord just swings one rearguard. I guess it's similar to Overlord because Overlord swings a rearguard, but in the case that you know, play a deck that doesn't have a front row, then yeah, then you're in a bit of a pickle. But otherwise, this is similar to Overlord, but I guess better in the sense that you can create multi-attacks from it. But I think Overlord itself hits harder in one go, whereas the power level on Minerva is spread across all the units that you call. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the Minerva comprehensive guide. If there is anything that you would want me to add to these type of videos, feel free to let me know. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the Minerva deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys enjoyed this video, click the like button down below, comment down below what you guys think of this deck. If you guys want to pick it up and play it for locals or, you know, your Springfest or whatever, I highly recommend picking this up. Super cheap at the moment, obviously other than the Calibres, but a super fun deck to play. If you guys haven't subscribed already, press subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.